Hello, Lee. Thank you so much for being in touch and for your question. I've actually spent quite a bit of time thinking about the treatment of people with disabilities in the Tudor period. Well, at least one particular sort of disability, which is learning disabilities, because I'm absolutely convinced that the court fools at Henry VIII's court and later were people with learning difficulties. So Will Sommer is perhaps the most famous. And the evidence for this is that those who were not considered disabled in some way, who were jesters at the court, received salary, but those who were fools, well, they called them natural fools at the time, naturally foolish, were given a keeper, a carer in other words, and it was the carer who received the money and the clothing, or at least the material with which to make the clothing, for those fools. So I think that's really, really interesting that we have a culture that at the Tudor court is very much celebrating the wit and innocence, because they're considered close to God, and the mirthfulness, I suppose, of these people that they considered natural fools, and we would say people with learning disabilities. It's much harder to get at the treatment of those with physical disabilities at the time, and my sense is that, largely speaking, society was less kind. But at the same time, I think it was very common, and so we do find some parish registers or records from parishes, but in other words, that refer to the treatment of individuals, but they're far and few between, and so we're slightly less left grasping in the dark. We only know about Tudor court fools because they're turning up at the court, and so they're being represented in the sort of sources that survive. You also asked about quotes. So, I mean, I love Erasmus. When I have a little money, I buy books, and if I have any left, I buy food and clothes. But the other thing I wanted to quote to you was Thomas Wyatt. So Thomas Wyatt was a great poet at Henry VIII's court, and I love his poetry so much. He's such a brilliant mind. So one of his poems is called Mine Own John Poins, and I've got it sitting in front of me here. And he says, "My points," as in referring to his friend by his surname, "I cannot frame my tongue to feign, to cloak the truth, for praise without desert of them that lust all vices to retain." Lust means want, So I cannot frame my tongue to feign. I cannot pretend to cloak the truth for praise without desert of them that lust all vices to retain. So I can't flatter these people who, in all truth, just want to hang on to all of the vices, all the evils that they have. And very much that's what you're required to do at court. And he goes on, in fact, to talk about he cannot crouch nor kneel nor do such wrong, to worship them like God on earth alone that are like wolves, these silly lambs among. And in other words, the person who's calling himself like God on earth alone is Henry VIII at this time. So he's talking about how there's a culture around praising a king who is acting like a wolf towards innocent lambs, when you're supposed to say he's amazing. But I find it a more generally useful principle. I cannot frame my tongue to feign. And the other thing he talks about, he's a poem which has been thought for a long time to be about Anne Boleyn, called Whoso Lists to Hunt, Whoever Wants to Hunt. I know where is a hind, I know where there's deer. And in it he leaves off, he says, from seeking and hunting this deer. Scythens in a net I seek to hold the wind. Since, says Scythens is since in modern English. Since in a net I seek to hold the wind. And I find that a very helpful metaphor as well, occasionally in my life, to think about. I'm trying to hold the wind in a net, and so I leave off, therefore. So I shall leave off now, Lee, but I thank you so much for being in touch and for your questions, and I wish you all the very best.